got a question then.
Okay. Sure, go ahead.
So one of the things, I always have like a little toolkit of things for problems that come up, but I haven't quite figured out what my lens metadata toolkit is. Right, I've seen a couple, Transvideo has some new to me monitors and stuff that you can kind of see stuff.
The metadata.
Yeah, right.
And
because part of the problem for me is like, you actually have to record, if we're talking about getting into the camera, we have to record a thing, and we have to analyze that thing. Sometimes that doesn't always fit into like a testing schedule. So it's not until later in the afternoon that we actually can look at the files.
it's true, and there are numerous ways to record the metadata. I began recording metadata using Cooper and Lynx motion control systems, and just by strapping encoders to the sides of the lenses, and then later Panavision built encoders into Super Pana heads and lenses for me for a number of productions. Now the technology is advancing, but it's still possible, and I guess you've actually done it, to encode even an old set of, for example, Baltars. It should be possible to encode them.
Do you have a question?
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that even with Zeiss style shading data, that still the lens may be mechanically misaligned, so that's not a good enough solution. Is that accurate?
If the lens has been serviced, the shading data and the geometry need to be remeasured and reprogrammed into the internal chip of the lens, but until that happens, it's accurate.
Or it's accurate enough, okay. So my thought was, why not have room in the metadata for like a vectorized version of the grid, so you could update it? Would that be a viable solution?
Yes, in fact, that's being incorporated as part of the spec.
Okay.
And a number of other things, including probably a vectorized version of the frame line and the active sensor as well.
Thank you. So many points to talk about. I mean, it's a funny thing that as we are having this conversation right now, we're also co-sponsoring an event in Mexico City with Zeiss, precisely all about the XD workflows. I think it's a great moment. You mentioned the fact that it comes into the economical range of filmmaking. Is it high-end to use metadata now? And I feel that it's not necessarily the case, considering that Zeiss is having both the supreme, primes end of the product line using XD and CP3s as well, which are their economical propositions. So I think that what we're facing right now, it's more educating the filmmaker, the current filmmaker, into these workflows and having them understand all the benefits down the line. I mean, as both a VFX artist and a cinematographer, I have encountered so many shows where I receive my camera, reports using S4 or S5s or whatever not /highs, and I'm always surprised that there's very few times, if at all, any times, that I receive metadata with them. So that means to me that there's not enough understanding on set, and it happens to me as well on set, that no one really takes the responsibility of carrying that metadata all the way down through the line into the post house.
I think it's because traditionally we haven't valued that metadata.
Correct.
Which is why it's only ever written down on camera report, if it's written down on camera reports or script reports. Then you have to go to editorial and dig out a book. And then if everybody got the same data right, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen the script report says that it's a 50 millimeter and the camera report says that it's a 35. And the problem with that is that we're letting human beings do this and not automating the process. But ultimately, the education curve is something that I liken it to the walkie-talkie. Before we had them, who knew we were going to need them? But now that we have them, can you imagine ever making a movie without them?
Right, and I think that's one of those things where it's like, it's the education, right? And I thank you for explaining it much better than I possibly could. But I mean, it's one of those things, and even you to speak to that point. I mean, right now we have camera, sound, and scripty recording what a take is. And as somebody that's been doing dailies for a long time, we haven't got that part sorted out. So I know who I can trust usually, but they never match. So yeah.
Yeah, for me it's sad to see how how often technology changes in 2000 to 2019. Often the operators, the DIT or the AC just simply don't have the time to learn all the functions of the tool, because soon another tool comes out and then they have to relearn again. Yeah? In our world, where we then do post-production with these color correctors, where we have 500 buttons, we play this huge panel like a piano, and it's depressing for me to see how many colorists don't know all the 5,000 functions or button on it, while others know it very well, but they have a blind eye and don't see color well. And, they know all the buttons. So it's interesting that we humans sometimes cannot follow the evaluation or the evolution and the reoccurring of new technology and have no time to learn everything. So the intelligent one then would need to learn what to learn. Or you just ask Dave Stump, what do you need to learn? Yeah.
Part of what we had shown with the very first CP3 demo was that it is incredibly beneficial to lower budget productions. That metadata following through and with the plugins that go into After Effects and into regular software, it was really extremely helpful to have that, not just on the high-end level, but on a lower budget end as well. So it's really beneficial to that.
Oh, no, absolutely it is. We've sponsored a couple of short films that could actually only happen. The budget was enough, given that we slashed on the post-production side because we had this metadata. That's a reality. I mean, it's a production-worthy tool. So I just had to throw my vote out there. I mean, on both ends of the spectrum, I really feel about lens characteristics having a place in the look and style of the film. Of course, they do. But if it comes down to visual effects heavy shows, I really believe that simplifying or cleaning the look will allow visual effects to happen properly and more efficiently. While obviously, if it's a heavily photographic show or if it's an only photographic exposition, definitely it's all about your lens choice. But it's an argument for sure.
I don't know if there's anybody in the room who knows what the percentage of box office was over the last year of just visual effects epics.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty big percentage of the box office globally, though. But I'm pretty hard pressed to remember seeing a film in the last 20 years that didn't have some visual effects in it.
I want to answer one more of your argumentation. Do we need high budget, very expensive lenses, or can we get away with the mid-range? Both will work, but I see that if you are a young student, want to get into the business, it helps you so much if you have the best possible lens and the best possible camera to learn the craft and to compose your image, to learn about painting with light. If you just have a simple $60,000 camera where you have an on-off button and the ASA and the tint setting, beautiful images. But if you have the $2,000 camera where you have 500 submenus and have to click through so many different buttons, it's so difficult to get the same setting the next day again, because you need to shoot again and again. So there, the cheap equipment, if I give Roger Deakins an iPhone, he will most likely win an Oscar, because he knows what to do, and Bob Richardson and Dean Simler and all the guys we work with. But I think if you want to learn your craft and you need the best result, the high-end technology really helps you. And then if you know what to do, then you can dumb down. Today it's often done the wrong way around. Yeah.
I think you just described 35mm film though.
Jane, really quick, do you want to play the BTS video with the lenses?
Sure. We want to play the BTS of Stucco, right? Sure. Why not? So this is a look. This is the film that EFLIM and Jay-Z involved with, a short film utilizing the Supremes, right? Not the CP3s. Supremes, yeah,
Supremes.
And this is just a little BTS look at that.
It's a little horror in it. If you're weak or pregnant, please leave the room. Can we dim these lights?
I'm gonna bet we need sound for this too.
We can just sync it.
Hold for sound.
Well, lip sync it. You take Russo.
Jay-Z could yodel for us.
Yodeling is actually a form of respect. It's not a laughing matter. If you say something clever, I will yodel.
No one today has said anything clever yet.
Equals MC squared.
There was a period of time of about 8 hours when Russo just went off grid, which is rare for him. And I called him like, "What, are you alive? Are you in an ER? Where are you?" And he was actually just in New York, and he had sweated out this fever dream of a first draft of Stucco. Our cinematographer is I-Jien Tran. She is a legend in the making. Mark my words.
So Zeiss reached out to me about potentially shooting a project to showcase their new lenses, the Supreme Primes, and I was very flattered and honored, and of course I was interested in doing it.
When we were in our pre-production meetings, we found out we had access to the Red Monstro, and pairing that with the Supreme Prime is something that hasn't been done many times. The lens communicates directly with the camera. So when you're talking about VFX shots and when you're shooting something like that, then you don't need any extra box or gack or any of that stuff. It's seamless and it makes the entire process faster and smarter.
And so with this system, with the Monstro and the Supreme Primes, we were able to get all the lens data information onto the negative, which is really exciting, especially when you're working with VFX, because it'll record the focal length, the distance, the T-stop, the height, everything, which is really cool, which means that on set, we have more time to light and to focus on other things. So Janina and Russo presented a lookbook to me, which included a lot of images. And so I really took those images and ran with it.
I took a frame and I said, "This is exactly like the shot from our lookbook." And she was like, "Huh? Oh yeah, okay." Q has a rock star DIT named Michael Romano. He was doing live grading right there. He took a reference still, and in 2 clicks, he had already matched color.
I really believe in trying to build the look into the CDL. Of course, the raw information is always there, and we can always go back. However, I always try to build that look as close to the final look as possible. The Supreme Primes are beautiful lenses, first of all. I loved shooting with them. They're so clean, there's not a lot of breathing, and they really created a beautiful, smooth look that I'm really pleased with. So I've shot large format in the past, and one of the reasons why I love it so much is because it sees the world in a different way. You can really shoot a close-up, but have more context. In the short, the house is trying to engulf her, is trying to swallow her, literally. And so it was important for us to show that relationship of the protagonist to the house, which led us to shoot these wider lenses close to her so that you could see all that depth behind her and feel the house. And I think shooting the large format really lended itself to the narrative.
We're sort of trained not to look at the things that make us uncomfortable. And I think our job as artists is to examine it fearlessly. Russo and I love slow burn 70s horror. We love practical effects.
And I think some of my favorite shots were with the tongue. How can we make this feel cool and sexy, but also weird?
So CineEmerge took care of props. They took care of art direction and makeup and practical effects.
Having this lens data is pretty phenomenal because we get like everything from the lens. There's a lot of times I don't get a lot of that lens data. Depending on what you're trying to do, especially for a shot that's tracking where you're adding elements in, you need to undistort the lens, especially if it's a wide lens. Like it's 24mm, we all know that that's pretty distorted. And it also has shading characteristics on the outside. What I like to do is look at the clip in Nuke, and then I click on the unshade and undistort nodes. And then you just see it unshade along the edges and undistort along the edges. And for some weird reason, I really like that. It makes me feel good inside, just knowing that that tool exists. At the beginning of this short film, we would just take the R3D file and use that directly in Nuke. But then when EFLIM started injecting the metadata into OpenEXRs, that was really nice because we could have 4K polls, but still have all that metadata within clip itself. You know, it's really cool to be like part of this process with Zeiss and trying out new technology.
I'm the child of an engineer, so I'm inspired by technology. You know, the only way to forge forward in a medium is to try everything. And I just feel really lucky that we've been able to do that with Zeiss and Red.
I found it interesting that you asked before we started the clip which lens were used, and you looked at me and I couldn't even answer because I don't know anymore. When we had the lens grids, I did know every lens personally because I had to transfer all the data for it, and now I'm not involved. It's a passive process now. It just gets rendered out from the Red RAW or the Sony RAW file into the EXR, and we are done with it. We don't have to deal with it anymore in post-production.
That's a little bit sad.
Don't know the lens anymore. It's done.
You'll get over it.
Sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was wondering, following the previous conference or panel about HDR, how can we emulate the eye process with metadata to have that on HDR from the lens information? Is that possible with the metadata? Will it help the HDR process, for example?
So we made an SDR and HDR path for that movie, for Stucco. And it's interesting, it's like the cinematographer needs to have in mind when the cut comes and the scene comes up, where is the audience looking at? Should we look at her, or should we look at the window or at the lamp? And in SDR, the window and the lamp is dim, 48 nits. And when we made the HDR theatrical version is 108 nits for Dolby Vision, so we doubled the brightness, and out of a sudden this little lamp is drawing the audience to look to the left side and not to the actor anymore. But I would say it's then the composition of the shot. It's the cinematographer on set who composes this shot. And in the future, that everything will be HDR, you have an HDR monitor on set and see the result there as well. But to automate it and have a sensitivity sensor for lighting in the lens, I think the sensor of the camera captures it anyway, but it's the DP's job to compose the image on set. And in the moment we are in the transition phase. And you might see this for your shows as well, that the question is, do we do the HDR path first or do we do the SDR path first? And the answer is that 98% of our viewers here and today watch it in SDR first. If you buy a new TV set today, it will be HDR capable, so this will change soon. So we are in the transition phase at the moment to learn about that. But I don't think it needs to be automated. It's still the job of the cinematographer to compose the image, the light and the shadow. But I know nothing about cinematography. This is why you are on the panel.
I just think it's I mean, it's only 108 nits for cinema, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because we're, you know, on the episodic TV side.
Yeah, and what does HBO know about cinema? Now I sound like $1 million Hollywood director now. Go ahead. I'm
speechless.
I'm so in love with Khaleesi, and I would like to fly the dragon with her once. So if I could be your friend, please.
No comment.
Listen, the machinery of cinema is there to enable the artist. Yes, better paints, better brushes, better easels, but Rembrandt's still Rembrandt.
Yeah, so this means he had his canvas and he had his tools and his colors and painted for that one deliverable. He painted this image, and we have this problem at the moment that we have one image which is in SDR 48 nits, theatrical 108 nits for HDR, but then for television we go up to 1000 nits, and it really punches you in the face if you see a full white 1000 nit image, or if you see a snow-filled mountain in 1000 nits, it's painful to the eye. And the human eye is actually an analog device. The iris is closing and it needs some time to open up again. So you cannot have very dark cuts next to very bright cuts because the human eye is too lazy to follow it. And fatigue will set in, headache will come in, and you are just not willing to get stressed to watch this bright and low movie. So we learn a lot about this at the moment. Yeah.
Never mind, I was going to go up.
But there should be a whole panel.
Yeah, there is a whole other discussion to have on that, but please.
So for those of us that aren't doing big budget Hollywood feature films, what application would it be for us? How can we use this technology?
Anytime you're incorporating visual effects.
So
even if
only
you're-
visual effects, there's nothing else that you could use this for? Just curious, I figured that was the answer, but yeah.
No, not necessarily. You know, if you're doing post and you want to know whether, you know, you cut between two complementary lenses or not, it's way easier to look in, eventually be able to look in metadata and see what lens you shot this on, rather than go get the notebook out and go through the script notes or the camera notes and find out whether they're correct about what two lenses the two shots you have in question were shot on.
I suppose reshoots too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, aesthetically, you actually might like that aspect of no shading and no distortion as well. So it could be you could potentially use it a creative aspect.
Even in normal shooting, if you've got, for example, you've got an 8K two-shot and you needed close-ups of the two actors in the two-shot, you could take the shading off and the distortion off, punch in on one of the actors, put shading and distortion back on again, and you have a viable close-up.
The spatial processing of your freeware is getting more powerful as well. See Resolve as an example. You could download it for free and learn it, and it's amazing what gets put in there. So sooner or later this will be part of it as well. While our Resolve has to play 120 frames per second, 4K stereo, so our Resolve still costs up to $300,000 because of all these expansion chassis and data transfer modules and acceleration GPUs. But you can download one version for free, and the independent filmmaker is using this freeware quite heavily at the moment. So all the argumentation you just heard from Erik and Dave will be available for free to you, S2K only, but that's pretty good. Yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to mention to the gentleman who just asked the questions about the lens data. One way you can learn about it, and this is something I learned in film school 5 years ago, is I had to match distances and scenes. I would go into Adobe Bridge, and there was a plethora of data right there.
If you're shooting, say, Canon or Nikon DSLRs, yeah, that metadata has existed in the still world for a long time. It's just starting to become incorporated into the motion picture world. So that might be a good place to stop. If there isn't any other questions, we can take one more if there's time, or if there isn't. Okay, fine. So thank you to the three panelists for coming out. Thank you to all of you for coming out.